Hello, welcome to another episode of Academia Podcast. Just want to wish everybody a wonderful Wednesday morning. It's the 13th of January, and we are broadcasting right in the heart of central Minnesota at the Warp Zone U Studios. I'm your host, Todd Thielen. And it is a delight having you here today. And if you're watching the YouTube video of this, you will see that there's a giant graphic right behind me. And I'll be getting into that in a little bit. I hope it's not too distracting. And for those that might say, you might be able to do picture-in-picture and show something on your screen. Well, that's nice, but sometimes I like having stuff on my wall as well. And if it was already there, then I'd like to keep it up. Just sometimes I like to see the vision that I carry around me when I walk around the rooms of my house. So I'll be getting into some of that and breaking that down. Basically, if you're curious, it is the Multiple Intelligences by Gardner, and I'll be explaining that later on today on how I use the multiple intelligences to help me in terms of developing a curriculum. Most importantly for my kids right now, but something to help empower you as you move forward. Homeschooling is a journey for you. School choice is a journey for you. Or maybe it's something where your kids are just staying at home and they've closed in-person learning for COVID reasons. You could use this as well just to kind of help tutor your own kids, to help educate them, and to just help them to get to the point where they're getting their assignments done in a way that clicks. So, anyways, we've been doing this podcast now for 13 days, and we've had a good number of podcasts coming up. Just want to thank you for hanging in there. If you've been listening and downloading our content, just want to thank you. We're about 50 downloads already right now, and I've been impressed. I believe that we're going to be going new places and touching new ground. We're actually reaching people all over the whole world right now in every different continent. So that's kind of nice. Sometimes we'll get someone from Brazil, or we'll get someone from India, or someone from England. They'll get a download, and I don't know how they found me, but we just thank you for your downloads, and thank you for hanging in there with us as we do make some upgrades with a better webcam and a better microphone coming in the future. And I've always believed in, before this year, I believed in waiting until I'm ready for it. And I realize I'll never be ready for it. And just like you, if you want to do something like this, just jump in and get going. I believe in a ready, fire, aim approach, that sometimes you just got to pull the trigger before you aim. And you see how you got to make decisions that turn the ship as you go, so to speak. But if you're watching YouTube, make sure that you like, that you subscribe, share the podcast, turn on notifications. That really helps us out. And if you're listening to the podcast as well, you can always like, subscribe, and share. That really helps us out just for growing purposes. And you don't want to miss something, because everything that I go over, none of it's in a vacuum. It's all connected. And I hope that once we're at the point of getting 10 shows or more, that we'll have that challenge for new listeners to take the 10 episode challenge and make sure that you go back and listen to the 10 episodes most recent, so everything is clicking. We're going to be continuing to go over some literature reviews, and the main purpose behind that is I want you to develop a book reading list as well and cover different areas. Cover areas that are nonfiction, cover areas that are fiction, cover stuff that's economics, cover stuff that's political theory, cover stuff that talks about our culture, talk about some things about your faith, talk about things about personal finance and parenting. It all connects. And the more we challenge ourselves and the more we sharpen ourselves with other people's ideas, the more firing happens in our brain, more synapses occur, and we're just quicker firing on all cylinders. Because I've been in places where I haven't been very active in my faith and with my challenging of myself mentally and physically, and it's not a fun place to be in when you're feeling defeated all the time. So I just want to help empower you more than anything else. I feel that's a call in my life Just for some of you that don't know, I've been in ministry before. I had moved out to Alaska in the year 2011, so it's about 10 years ago. Moved to a little town called Angoon, Alaska, in the southeastern part of the state, right off of the shores of Canada there, south of Juneau. Lived on an island that had 1,500 brown bears and about 400 people. Needed to do yard work with a pistol on my belt because I never knew if there was going to be a brown fuzzy creature that was interested in me as lunch. So, and then after that, in the year 2013, I moved to northwest Alaska, Kotzebue, and that wasn't very full of mountains or trees. It was very flat and tundra. I eventually had met my wife out there, Emma, and we've been married, and it's almost approaching our 5th year anniversary this year, and we've got 2 beautiful children, Talissa and Titus, in whom I plan to homeschool Talissa with my own designed curriculum. And that is a plan, a goal of mine that I can help empower you to create your own curriculum as well. When I moved back to Minnesota, I took some education classes, and I was going to go into secondary education with getting a variance in middle school so I can actually extend to be a high school teacher or an elementary school teacher at need be if the needs do arise. However, after about my 2nd year of doing the curriculum and basically all the core curriculum, once we started getting in the schools, I started seeing something I did not like. And things had changed since I was a kid. And this was in rural parts, and basically the things that I saw going in more urban parts, and even working in schools and help designing curriculums in northwest Alaska. I used to work at a group home while I was in ministry as well, and there would be kids there that needed help in terms of their education and things that maybe the teachers are just overburdened or their resources just were not at the top priority to be able to get them to be able to stick with all of their priorities, maintain benchmarks, maintain goals, the Department of Education and the local school boards. And you just get to the point where, sometimes the rubber doesn't meet the road for some of these kids. I do want to help you to be able to get to that spot because there was at one point where I was teaching a 5th and 6th grade displaced children outside of their homes in a group home and teaching them how to read as if they were in kindergarten or 1st grade. By the end of the year, we were making weekly trips to the library. They were having book reading goals on their own. And if it's something they can do, we can do it as well. We can help empower. We can help equip our kids. And so I'm excited to see where things are going. I had went over the books already this year of The Law by Bastiat and The Richest Man in Babylon by George Clason. We did a political theory book to kind of start the year off. And then we did a personal finance one as well. And I thought I would jump the ship and kind of go into some things more regarding my faith. I actually had never read The Abolition of Man by C.S. Lewis, and I had no idea what it was about. I was just kind of intrigued at the title, and I know that there's really nothing that C.S. Lewis has written that isn't worth reading. He's always full of substance. So here's the book, Abolition of Man by C.S. Lewis. It's a pretty short book. It's about 100 pages long, but it's all in essay format. So if you were going to write a 100-page essay in college, you would know for sure that would take you a while to write. It would take you a lot, if someone wanted you to peer review and edit that, it would be a while for you to read it. So he breaks it down in 3 little mini essays, and they're all related to one another. And basically speaking, to go over this book, it does connect with the conversation that we're having already. C.S. Lewis, I thought this was going to be a book kind of more talking about maybe the sinful nature of man, or maybe talking about how we get to a place of where we get to a spot of repentance and realizing our need for Christ and salvation and being born again. But actually, to believe it or not, he does not talk very much about religion in this book at all, if at all. I mean, he makes brief references to it, but it's not like some of his other books, not like Mere Christianity at all, and not like his fiction books at all. This was very much an essay book, and it has a very secular tone to it. And if anything, it's an indictment on, believe it or not, education. So it actually fits into the conversation that we're having very well. And anyways, C.S. Lewis starts his book by giving an indictment on religion. And instead of just criticizing a book of a temporary in his time, he makes the criticism that he has toward this individual with a form of anonymity, meaning that he chooses to keep the authors anonymous. He chooses to call the authors Gaius and Titius, has very Greek-sounding names. So Gaius and Titius wrote what he calls the Green Book. And so instead of it becoming one extended Yelp review of how he's against this book, or an Amazon 1-star, basically he goes into depth about how this book is making him sick to his stomach, and he goes into great reasons why. So basically speaking, this Green Book, so to speak, is an English homework book for school-age children. Now, you'd go to think, I've read many books growing up. There's some certain books that help us with our writing, with our grammar, with our spelling, understanding the mechanics of the English language, and we understand that all. But for some reason, C.S. Lewis read this book, which was meant for middle-aged kids, middle school-age kids, if you excuse me, and basically says that through reading it, he had noticed many subtleties that no one at that age of professionalism, with that geared amount of professional level put into the penmanship of this book, there was all sorts of hidden agenda in that book. And basically speaking, that you get to a point where you're a middle school age student and you think it's just English homework. But there's all sorts of socio-political aims to reinforce larger paradigms into what the students at the time, they won't even know that they're learning them. But as they grow older, they become more familiar and more familiar with these overarching themes, whether it's just the content of what's being taught, or whether it's the use of certain words, certain vocabulary, or the way they use example sentences to frame a worldview that they're eventually wanting a student to grasp. See, now what C.S. Lewis goes on to say is that all of us have value that we add when we approach a certain subject, what he calls as a traditional morality. And basically speaking, he goes to argue saying there is no objective value for those who claim to be in science. We all bring different forms of values when we do approach a topic. There is a superimposition of new values over traditional values. And what he means by this is that there is those that hold traditional values, that they have, maybe it's the duty to your wife, duty to your parents, your duty to justice, whatever types of duty that you feel, such as, let's say, law enforcement, they have a duty to protect and serve. C.S. Lewis would argue that maybe those types of impulses are not natural or instinctual, but is something that we do form in terms of a morality that we do have in some type of social contract to one another. So whether it's not that you feed yourself because you're an instinctual creature, or that you have a sexual desire for someone because you have an instinctual desire for the survival of your species, he goes on further to say, now, we don't have any type of concern that we will get our next meal fed, or that we are no longer questioning is our species at risk of extinction, but we still have those urges anyways. And that maybe the traditional values are something that are a little bit harder to keep, but nonetheless they are still there and reinforced. But however, there is a few in power that are always desiring to implement a new type of system of values onto our students. And it's not just students in the schools, but it's those that are in the field of eugenics as well. There have been attempts to make and precondition infants in the womb, and as soon as they are out, the conditioning begins, and it never stops. There will always be a few in power controlling the masses, is what is known as the inevitability of an oligarchy. And whether everything is in societies is more private, you can see this as few businesses that try to lobby and pay interest for larger political leverage so they can muscle the masses to buy or trade. Basically speaking, is that there are few in the powers in local business, and they use their leverage with governments at B to use whatever type of leverage they can to steer the people to buy what they want them to buy. to remind them that they are the ones with the strength and that they are the few that are in power. Or whether there is an equal form of public and private sectors, there will always be a few in power controlling the masses, whether it be the stronger governments of the few controlling the weaker governments and the weaker societies. And then also if there was a one world government, or where government was huge and there was the largest state possible, you would see the power of the few over the masses of its citizens. So there's this argument that Lewis makes that no matter what, there are those special interests at be, many of them without a name, that are creating the propaganda, that are creating the benchmarks, that are creating the textbooks, that are funding the curriculums, and they're funding the Common Core, they're funding the No Child Left Behind, they're making the things in the larger form of public education the way that they are to reinforce the control that they want to have over societies. Essentially, it's to get humans to stop questioning. It's to get them to accept this new form of value, away from traditional values to their new value system that they have without a name, and to mindlessly approach topics without accepting them. To accept them and to mindlessly approach them without challenging them. So basically, he uses a long form of induction without explaining the title of his book until almost the very end, and he almost says to use this reinforcing examples that he's making is that ultimately the purpose of man, therefore, then has been the abolition of man. So it kind of hits you at the end, the more and more that you pay attention and maybe reread it a second time, which I certainly did, because the first time I read it, it was quite challenging to read because it gets very thick. And if you are an academic and you are reading commentary by another scholar, a lot of times they don't go into depth with what they're saying. They'll refer to other well-known contemporaries just by their last name, and they'll make a comment about things that they've said, often at times without sourcing them or giving them the proper citations that you would see in an undergrad type of essay. So you have to do your due diligence to be able to make your thoughts go full circle. And so basically speaking, C.S. Lewis wrote this book as a voice calling in the wilderness, kind of similar to what Bastiat that we read about in the 1850s. If you're interested in that, that's in our earlier podcast. So the more we look at this, especially with this year being a post-2020, it might sound like it resounds, that it's making more and more sense if you do take a look at some of the behavior of governments. But if you were to take a listen to it maybe before, it might sound a little bit more conspiracy theory, or you might see a few pieces of connections here and there. But the way of the behavior of the state and the power of the few, we can definitely see them trying to coerce or control over every sector of society, ultimately to control the masses, even if there is forms of doublethink, people having double standards with different attempts of reasoning, whether you think riots are okay for this, but they're not okay for that. Gathering in public is okay for this, but it's not okay for that. And so, but anyway, what happens is that you get to the spot where the way we value and how we approach a subject with our set of values, we begin to think, what should be our appropriate reason, our appropriate values, and is it okay to add this to the conversation instead of simply ignoring our values because it is a value. And some would make you want to question that, whereas C.S. Lewis would reinforce the idea that it's totally appropriate for you to bring your own value to the table. So the whole conversation here makes me think of modern day progressivism and how they have their own set of values, and basically speaking, those values are without a name. They do change over time, and basically speaking, they are an antithesis of the traditional conservative values. If you look at it, the conservative values have a value for the traditional nuclear family, mom and dad at the home with kids, maybe a dog, stay-at-home mother, educating the kids, one-income household, strides to achieve the American dream, whereas the antithesis of this would be the progressives have seemingly attempted more or less to undo conservatism at any angle. even to the point of rewriting history, tearing down statues, trying to provide their own form of manifesto without having a manifesto. So the closest thing that I could see to what they're using is the Communist Manifesto that embraces Marxism, but I'm not quite certain that even all progressives would understand that in its context. If anything, I do believe that the left in America is not even progressive anymore. If anything, they are a regressive left with attempts to race bait, to use identity politics, and to embrace systems of economics such as socialism that have failed the masses of people with every experiment that has been implemented. So basically speaking, the leftist agenda has simply been to do away with the conservative agenda and lack the aim to have any true values of their own. And most religions of the world, if they were to unite under one banner, would all agree to there is some types of morality that they do have in common. Yet the left is working to undermine it in overtime. The role of the family unit, the role of the authority of the father, the church as a place of influence, the gender differences in the home, in society, the role of the woman in the home, and the role of the church and the family in the role to educate their own children. So what all comes back here once again to the importance of educating our children. I know that many of you all play your own roles and how that takes shape. If you do have kids in public school, whether you help them with their homework or you do see in the background them attending Zoom meetings, and what you do to help them out to make sure that they're at the topmost quality and how they approach their public education, you certainly play a role. Or whether that they go to a private school and you've done your research to find out how these teachers and how this curriculum and how the body as a whole reinforces the best quality of education that your dollars can buy. And certainly you do play a role there. Or whether you used your school choice to opt them into a charter school, or even as we gear this conversation to how you homeschool your kids, researching curriculums, or how you design your own curriculum. You know, it's certainly a lot of hard work to design your own curriculum, but I think it's worth it. And basically speaking, we're getting to the area of the multiple intelligences already. Basically that we do have subjective value, and we have to be intentional with it, as C.S. Lewis did talk about here in his book. We don't want to ignore it. And basically speaking, we got to be intentional as parents in how we teach our kids, because if we don't, then they will be indoctrinated by other forces and other minds working in overtime to get them pulled away, that is away from anything as Christians or anything that is conservative of value. We've seen more and more censoring as of late. It's not a hidden type of thing. And as Christ has said, that all that is concealed will be revealed. There is nothing hidden that will not be disclosed. And we're seeing more and more of that happening. And basically speaking here, I wanted to provide a resource as well. If you wanted to read this book, if you wanted to check it out, or anything written by C.S. Lewis, and you have a hard time tracking the words, and maybe you listen to an audiobook and you still having a hard time, then based off these multiple intelligences that I'll be explaining in a minute, there is a resource on YouTube called it's the YouTube page C.S. Lewis Doodle. And so they go through every C.S. Lewis book and they provide doodles in order to provide a visual, because C.S. Lewis has a very active brain, and he goes on to explain the things that are very conceptual in nature and how they will click. I'll tell you what, I did watch them after my first read through this book, and I understood the concepts a lot more, maybe because I'm a visual learner. And so we'll be going on and we'll be explaining this, and I just want to get closer to it here real quick. And basically speaking, these are the multiple intelligences. I do apologize if this is mirrored, but I'll be attempting to try to fix that as we do the editing process here. So I'm going to go over this here, and it talks about, I believe it's 8 areas of intelligence. And basically what I did is I took every single area and I kind of prorated it on my own. I had some observational tests. I could provide some of that in the links here as well. And I pretty much gave all my kids a score on where I feel that their intelligence are having more suitable strengths. So here we'll start with musical, and musical is a way of approaching a certain topic. I know some people that I've met, and I'm personally one of these people as well. Musical is one of my strongest suits, even though I didn't start playing any music till I was 19. But sometimes you can memorize certain things more if you have a melody to it, like a Bible verse or a quote. If you were to sing a melody to it, then you might remember it more. I remember I memorized Galatians 5:1 because I had used the melody from Tom Petty's Breakdown. So instead of saying, break down, go ahead and give it to me. Break down, honey, take me through the night. I would use the Galatians 5:1 to memorize it. It would be, stand fast, therefore, in the liberty in which Christ has set us free, and do not be entangled again by a yoke of bondage. Stand fast, therefore. So use that. I know it's kind of silly, but basically speaking, I had used certain things about how to use different instruments, vocals, rhythm, the timbre, and dynamics to be able to use different topics to teach music to them. Moving next, we have visual and spatial. I have different areas where I could use 3D crafts, story narratives, nature, STEM, art, sensation, photography, books, nonverbals, video games. Yes, I did not mistake that. Video games, you can use video games such as Tetris to teach your kids how to develop their visual and spatial reasoning. Statistics, and you think, how am I going to teach stats to a 4-year-old? You can use marker and bar graphs and pie graphs and stacking blocks to be able to use different types of conceptual information to give them mere exposure. And what I mean by mere exposure is not all the time are we trying to get them to master everything. We didn't approach the English language this way. We just heard it, we were immersed in it, and we do that with our kids with everything. And we get them to the point where we're just providing mere exposure. So if they're in 2nd or 3rd grade and we're bringing back statistics, they have pre-existing knowledge that they're working off of. And they started when they were 3 and 4 years old just by playing with blocks and making pie charts and bar graphs. You can teach stats to kids this way. Getting into interpersonal things, I also like to call this self-smarts. I threw in spiritual because everything I'm doing, I'm not separating the church and state. I'm incorporating it. So I put a star with self-smarts. So that would basically, for them, can't read yet, we're going to provide a picture journal with emotive stickers or like emojis, basically of how they felt that day. You can use and learn how to work on their autobiography by continuing to develop their self-story. So maybe you're in the car and you're just asking them in the back seat there, what do you remember? What's your earliest memory? Or tell them, what's the story? What is Talissa's story? Working independently. Maybe sometimes you don't actually think about that as much. But what are some quiet time activities? Or maybe we don't only send kids to their room if they're in trouble. Maybe they're introverted in nature, or maybe they just need that form of quiet time to pause and reflect. What are some activities that they can do to help develop their self-smarts? We also have storytelling, perspectives, RPG games. Believe it or not, you take ownership of your own character. So you can think of things such as playing Dungeons and Dragons and having your kids get school credit for it. Skills. You could have them watch Daniel Tiger and have them to develop the ideas of what do you do when you make a mistake, or how to forgive others, or how to process anger. See, all this stuff are things that I'm thinking about, how we can develop into a curriculum so we don't miss certain areas, because we want all this stuff to connect. We don't want to have education be the things they're learning and it's approaching different subjects here like spokes of a wheel. We want it all to blend. We want a holistic approach to education. Continuing on, we have naturalistic. If I were to think here about one of my kids, this would be my son Titus in a nutshell. He will probably benefit in the future off of hiking and just being in nature. What are some activities for nature smarts for 2 to 5-year-olds? Identifying elements of nature, trees, leaves, rocks, starting a collection, catching butterflies, getting your hands dirty. Just let them be outside. splashing in water, playing with rocks, observing sand and dirt, gazing at the clouds, the stars, sunsets, the colors of a rainbow, thunderstorms, snowfall gazing, watching over the moon phases, watchful over the night sky, the awareness around pets and animals, asking why about natural phenomena. Why does it rain? Why is the sky blue? Get them to go camping. Have them just watch the fire. Get them to garden and to develop the idea of producing seeds. You could teach them about seed time and harvest this way. Climb stuff. Listening to crickets. Books about natural phenomena. Teach on endangered species. Teach on recycling versus garbage. Get them to watch some good old-fashioned Steve Irwin, or have them read about Jacques Cousteau, Go Diego Go, Jungle Junction, some Boombafoo, Backyardigans. You can use TV. You don't have to do all the teaching. You can do some passive learning as well. Not everything has to be active engagement. Moving on to logical and mathematical. This is kind of like where people say that they're number smart. And so doing some pre-math stuff before kids even get to the spot where they're doing arithmetic, you can put things in order, make patterns, identifying numbers, do some counting, make some puzzles, and then also make sure that we're practicing the reasoning of cause and effect, which gets us to the point of what causes one thing to get us to another thing. And so I have other areas of where we can do things with more calculator plays, paint by numbers, getting more to logic using major minor scales or beginning coding or using syntax and grammar. All that stuff's for later ages, but are things that I'm already thinking about now. And then word smarts. Some people would try to say, I am not a math person. I'm an English person. Well, there's a lot more to it. There's basic grammar. Kids at this ripe age can learn languages faster than adults. So we said, should we teach them a little bit of Spanish or some French or maybe some German? Maybe teach them some of Mom's language, which is Inupiaq. Going on to grammar, we're going to try working on speaking in full sentences, or if a kid's whining, we tell them to use their words. Common confusers, or maybe using the tense wrong, having them learn past, present, and future tense. Using speech practice to writing, basically speaking, how can we get them to the point where they know that their words have a phonetic representation written down, and then also providing examples in reading. So this all helps, basically speaking. Here we get to the point of reading back here. Sometimes I like watching movies with my kids and letting them know that there's a physical book behind it that it was adapted from. Letting them know of some more phonetic awareness when they're at their pre-school age. So we get them to start developing better, getting them some foundations of education and pre-existing knowledge. So then moving to syntax, how do we put words in order? Kind of a little more difficult for kids at that age. Sometimes they want to get to the point where they're just forming sentences. We're not concerned about the order at this point. Finding out the meaning of words, semantics, identifying words, synonyms and basic definitions would be under vocabulary. Spelling. I would argue that spelling is more logical and mathematical, but we're using letters, so let's keep them with letters. Learning how to write words correctly. Drama. This one's always fun. Putting on costumes and playing the stories out. Understanding the elements of a story. Is this the beginning, the middle, the end? What is going on here? What's the character development? So when they're being to tell their own stories over an autobiography and just telling their own stories, they're learning the concepts of the story, but not just in forms of storytelling. We want to get them to the point where they're knowing more about rhetoric and dialogue, and so that they can later develop in, let's say they're in high school and I want them to read more Aristotle and Plato. You think, why would you teach someone in high school that? Well, we want to teach them college stuff in high school. Reading, we already went over that, but we can get them word books, intro books with sight words, novels to read to them. Reading to kids is the best thing that you can do to help them develop word smarts. Read a book to them every day, whether it's a chapter book without pictures or it's one of their books. Working on handwriting, so maybe there's something at Target that helps them to do their letters. And also developing enunciation with speech. A lot of children don't have access to the resources of speech-language pathology, but you can certainly do things to help them learn the formation of their words. So that is word smarts, and then going on to the last two, we have interpersonal, which is people smarts. This one's fun. This would probably be Talissa's strongest category and probably a close second for me. Role-playing, we can do skits, play with dolls, play with puppets, and yes, watch movies. Empathy, we learn lessons by learning other people's perspectives. Having a homeschool co-op, I know a lot of people have an indictment against homeschooling because they feel like they won't have the ability to socialize. And so basically speaking, that homeschool co-ops is a great way for, a certain number of families to get together so their kids can play together. And they can learn the roles of one another, and they can play with younger kids and older kids as well. And also doing things, interactions with church, family day life, and everyday life. With interpersonal, we also want to teach them good manners, good habits, and development. And then also lessons in interpersonal and also intercultural communication, which is always a fun one. My kids are half Inupiaq, and they are also, half dad, whatever type of mutt he is. And so they're learning about different cultures as well every single day. Last thing would be bodily kinesthetic. I know this is a strong suit for both our kids, especially when kids are active. We want to do things that are helping them with their gross and fine motor skills and having lots of physical activity. They need the freedom to move. Basically speaking, they got to do things such as rock climbing, go to playgrounds, watch YouTube dances for kids, make sure they're appropriate. There's a lot of smut out there. YouTube activities for kids, indoor playgrounds, field trips, and then hide and seek, do family games, scavenger hunts, charades, play hot potato, play hallway laser string maze, so get a lot of yarn with thumbtacks put together and have them dodge the yarn. Those are always fun, and basically speaking, the kids just need that type of bodily smarts and kinesthetic smarts. They need to be in contact with how their body moves, especially if you're homeschooling and you don't have physical education. They need to do things that's not just physical sport, but things that are just getting them to move around. Play Pictionary or Blind Man's Bluff, where they're blindfolded and they have to use their other senses to get around. But dance, climbing, playing, let them build things with Legos, with Connects, with blocks, with cups, making paper airplanes. We'll do family active games, as we already talked about, getting them to get into contact with their coordination, to catch a ball, to jump on curbs, doing a 180, to jump on a trampoline, maybe for young toddlers to put their pants on, or to just jump on a small trampoline, or to balance on a curb. Basic chores. This is something that is also a must. Fold the dishes. Sorry. Yeah, how do you fold a dish? Fold towels, and do dishes. Wipe the bathroom sinks. Wipe the doorknobs. Clean the table. Put clothes away. Help mom and dad with the washer and dryer of unloading. And also put in garbage in the garbage. So you can do age-appropriate chores, but they have to get to the point where they understand that chores are a necessity into honoring your parents and also taking pride in your house. I do have a good resource about doing chores. It's by our pastor, Pastor David Blair, and wrote a book called Do I Have to Do That? And it's about doing chores. And I'll put a link for that in as well at the bottom of the podcast description. And also doing extracurriculars. I know things are kind of crazy with the COVID, post-COVID world, but having girls do dance, gymnastics, swimming, tennis, and soccer, or hockey, wrestling is always fun. Also having Titus skiing, snowboarding, skating, wrestling, swimming, football, soccer. There's all sorts of things you can do. All right, so I am all wrapped up with the 8 multiple intelligences based on the education plan that we're doing. And so that was kind of in a nutshell. I kind of went over a quick survey of different activities that you can do to help develop a curriculum for your kids. And it's just a broad survey. And basically speaking is that we're aiming at lots of, you gotta say hi to Alyssa. She's saying hi. And so there are a lot of different things that you can do to develop a natural curriculum in your house based on the ebbs and flows of what you're already doing as a family. You can do that in a way where we're writing and taking good logs and good paper trails and submitting that to your superintendent. that is providing credit just for the natural things that you do, that provides good education. There's no reason why the values that you carry and the natural rhythms of your life can't be educational. And I want to teach on how we can develop those things in a curriculum. And it's also achieving benchmarks in the areas that's providing the compliance that you need in order to get the state off your back, because they really need to go away. So I really hope that you liked the podcast here today. If you have questions, make sure that you do email me at todd@warpzoneu.com. And then also, next on Friday, we're going to be going over The Believer's Authority by Kenneth Hagin. You can find the PDF online. It's not the longest book in the world. It should take you about 4 days to read it if you read about 25 pages a day. And basically, this book is about of everything you need to know to carry your own authority in the home, but more importantly, the authority that God has given you as a son or daughter, and as a co-heir with Christ. So if you appreciated the podcast, if you got anything out of it, please please subscribe, please share it with a friend, and make sure that you leave a review. I can't emphasize that enough. Talissa wants you to go to her Toy Town website. I'll leave a link up there for that as well. She hasn't produced a video for that in a long time. But once again, leave a review if you've got anything out of it. We definitely appreciate that. And once again, we hope you have yourself a great Wednesday. Thank you for tuning in. Thanks. Be safe, and God bless.